So today on the podcast, we have brought Cornucope's own founder, Jami Emerson.
Hey,
so Jami,
Sam.
how's your week been?
Yeah, it's been good. It's been a really crazy week. I have a lot going on with uni, and so this week has been taking things off my plate and saying no to people, which is not always easy, for sure.
Yeah, for sure. So, like with every guest that we bring on to the podcast, we like to start off with sharing our pet peeves. So Jami, what is your pet peeve?
Yes, I haven't actually shared this one yet. So I have the randomest pet peeve, and a lot of them are random, but I actually can't handle straws that are too long.
Straws that are too long?
Yeah. Like, so, for example, if you have, like, a drink, it can only be, like, the straw has to be a certain amount of height above the drink.
Yeah, the ratio has to be perfect.
The ratio
right?
has to be perfect. It has to be, like, if you take the height, include the height of the straw and the cup, the cup is, like, 2/3, and the straw is maximum 1/3.
Okay, I see what you mean. Yeah.
Like, because otherwise it's too much, and then, I don't know, it just, the straw, you, like, end up shoving it in your face accidentally, and, like, I just can't handle it.
Or the straw slips out of the cup.
Yeah, because it's too high.
It's too high, yeah, exactly.
And it's disproportionate. I can't deal.
Well, going on that, paper straws or plastic straws?
This is a controversial one, because if I say paper, then I'm, like, pro-environment.
Yeah.
But if I say plastic, I prefer plastic. It's like, then I, like, don't like the environment.
Yeah.
Probably, like, I respect paper straws.
Mm-hmm.
I prefer to drink out of plastic straw, but I actually just prefer not to drink out of a straw the majority of the time.
Good point. Save the environment, don't use a straw.
Yeah, exactly. And
exactly.
I don't know. That's how I feel about that. It's the randomest thing.
So, moving on. Recently on our Instagram, we've gained a lot of new followers. And a lot of them have been asking for your recovery journey from CFS. Now, before we go into your actual recovery, why don't you take us back a little and go into how you got diagnosed with CFS,
Yeah.
what was happening at the time, and
Yeah, I mean, I think going back to what you're saying about people asking me, and I mentioned this on our Instagram post, that I've been hesitant to kind of share my journey just because my journey is different than someone else's journey, right? And I never want to come across as I'm sharing this because this is the pathway to recovery for you, or, everybody's on their own path, and I respect that, and Cornucope is about getting the people the resources they need, but not telling them that this is the right thing for them, because they ultimately have to decide for themselves. So I think people have been asking, and I'm like, okay, well, if that's if that's how I can get back to the community, share my journey, and maybe show people that it's actually possible to recover from chronic fatigue syndrome, I want to do that. And yeah, I think going back to how I got diagnosed, it was, I think looking back, I was 23 when I got diagnosed. I'm 27 now, so it was about 4 years ago. And looking back, it doesn't surprise me now that I did get chronic fatigue syndrome, because kind of the season leading up to getting chronic fatigue, I was living in France. I moved there when I was 19, so I spent my early 20s living in Paris, France. I was studying in foreign language, working, and volunteering a lot of my time with different projects. And I was essentially overdoing it. I was dealing with depression, living in a foreign country alone, away from people that I'd grown up with, totally different culture as well, where French culture is very different to American culture. So then kind of, struggling through university and the early 20s, the struggles that you go through as someone in your early 20s of confidence and insecurity and finding your identity and all of that. So as much as I loved living in Paris, it was a challenging time. And I also had anxiety, and so
you had a lot on your plate at that time.
I had a lot on my plate, but it was the early days of bigger issues, internal emotional issues were starting to manifest themselves, right, in my life. And so, so I realized I had depression about 2 years into it, started working on that. Had to kind of take a step back from my studies and focus on my mental health. And then about 6 months after that, I went back to the U.S. to visit my family, and while I was there, we got in a really bad car accident, and it was very traumatizing in the sense of like there's 5 of us in the car, so my dad was driving, my mom and my sisters were in the back seat, and I was in the front seat because I get car sick, so they let me have the front seat. And we were going about like 75 kilometers per hour and about 45 miles per hour. And my dad blacked out while he was driving. Just like, it was just this fluke thing. He'd never blacked out before, and I was in the front seat, and we literally swerved in front of this car in the oncoming lane, hit a ditch, flipped like 3 times or twice, landed on the side in a ditch. We also hit a telephone pole and almost knocked the telephone pole over.
Oh, that's pretty bad. Big
Yeah,
accident.
it was like the car was totaled. We honestly should have died because it was the accident was that bad.
Wow.
And I remember when we I remember being entirely lucid the whole time. I saw it coming. I remember the moment we were sort of in limbo, spinning in the air, thinking, "Oh my gosh, this is happening!" Like a life flash before your eyes moment, you know? Right? The airbag went off. There was glass everywhere, and when we landed, I was the only one that was lucid enough to respond.
Oh, so you were pretty much the only one conscious enough to be aware of anything.
Yes. So when we landed, there was dead silence in the car, and I'm getting like chills thinking about it because I literally thought in that moment that my whole family had died. And it was just a split second because then I heard noise in the back, right? And then my dad started moving next to me. But I feel that something was taken away from me in that moment where I thought that my family had died, or it was like, and when you talk about trauma, actually, because I went through counseling, and we talked about this, and what actually happens is when you experience something traumatic, your brain, you actually can't cope, and so your brain disconnects the emotion from the event. So you remember the event, but you don't necessarily feel the emotions.
Right. Yeah.
Because when something traumatic happens, so when that moment in my brain happened, or that the accident happened, that's when the trauma happened, and then something disconnected. So the emotions went from being sort of in my, I think it's called the frontal lobe, to my back here where like memories are stored, and you have to like reconnect them in order to process the event. And I never processed the event.
Okay. So is it only recently that you've gone through and like resolved that trauma?
Yeah, probably actually. It's I think that there was a lot of like I've been through a lot of other traumatic events. Like I've had a lot of other trauma in my life, so I think they're all related, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
So I think you deal with one and more comes up, but I probably only dealt with it recently, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So continuing from there, that was the beginning of the chronic fatigue and chronic pain. So we kind of went through that. Everyone was fine except my mom broke her collarbone, so that was kind of a massive thing. But like other than that, we were fairly unscathed. I had no visible injuries.
Mm-hmm.
I had no visible injuries, and other than a concussion.
Yep.
And my sisters were pretty okay. We've all kind of had some back issues, but about 2 months after that, I went back to Paris about 2 weeks after the accident, and then I started getting chronic pain within a month or two, and chronic fatigue.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
So was that a quick sort of diagnosis when you were in France, or was it sort of like a kind of question whether or not it was something else, or
Oh my gosh, my journey with doctors in France was exhausting and humiliating, and I mean, I love France, but this is like this with doctors in a lot of places. So it's
True.
nothing against France or doctors in general. It's just they don't always know how to. In my experience, they don't always know how to treat people with chronic conditions. So I went to the doctor and I was like, oh, I'm getting back pain, and this is happening, and that's happening, and they're like, oh, you have depression, or oh, you need to go swim, and that will help you with your back pain, or here's some pain medication, or you need to do these exercises. And I mean, I did get an MRI, and we checked to make sure structurally everything was fine, and it was. But there was no diagnosis, and then it's like they treated me like I was crazy, like that it was all in my head, that I had depression, and that I just needed to deal with the depression. And so I think that, I remember there was a moment where I came out of the doctor's office and called a friend, and it was like raining, and I was under an umbrella, and I just burst into tears, and I was like, I don't know, like, they don't believe me, and I know something's wrong, and I just can't, it was this hard journey, and I ended up having to take some time off work. I moved house to go live with some friends who put me up for 2 months, and I said to myself, like, at that point I couldn't work anymore because I was in too much pain. I was working at a cafe. I had
pretty much life kind of comes to a halt then at that point, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I moved in with them, and I said to myself, I'm going to give it 2 months, and I'm going to rest.
Mm-hmm.
And if I don't get better, I'm going to move back to the U.S. because I can't keep.
Yeah.
I can't support myself. I can't keep.
You need your support group, well, which is mainly your family, right?
Yeah, I needed to live somewhere where I could, live for free and get some level of support. So, and also, like, I had medical insurance in the U.S. at the time, and I felt that in the U.S. I might get a little bit more understanding about what I was going through and finding the root cause and all of that, because I think at the time chronic illness and these sorts of things were very much not on the radar for French doctors and more on the radar for American doctors.
Okay, so when you did go back to the US, was it a bit of an easier road then to a proper diagnosis?
Yeah, so it was. I had lived in France for 3 years, and I made the decision to move back. Within 3 weeks, I had moved back to the U.S. It was actually probably the hardest decision I've ever made in my life, because I didn't want to move back to America. I loved living in Paris. I had a support network, which was amazing. But it wasn't the right thing to stay. And so when I went back, it was pretty much straight away, I'm going to figure out what this is and figure out how to get better.
Path to recovery, pretty much.
Yeah. So, I mean, I think the path to recovery fully started when I got a diagnosis.
Of course, yes.
You know?
How can you recover from what you don't know, right?
Yeah, exactly. It was a very confusing time because, I mean, so many people have no awareness of chronic fatigue, and it's probably more common now than it was even 3 or 4 years ago for people to know what it is. But so like even just talking to people and trying to explain to them, like, I'm in so much pain, and at the time it was mostly back pain that I was dealing with, which caused some fatigue, but the chronic fatigue hadn't fully set in. So yeah, I went to the doctor, and originally for my back pain. That's what the main goal was. And I saw a naturopath. My hometown is Portland, Oregon, so I saw a naturopath in Portland. And we were talking about all my symptoms, and I really went to her for pain, but there was a point in our discussions where she said, Jamie, I think you have chronic fatigue syndrome.
So she just brought it up?
She basically just gave me a diagnosis of chronic fatigue syndrome.
Yeah.
And I was like, I didn't know what it was.
Mm-hmm.
And then I went home, and as you do, I Googled, and I'm like, oh,
Oh,
my
yes, of
gosh,
course.
I'm dying.
The scariest thing, typing
No.
in a diagnosis into Google and just reading WebMD and all these other things, people's anecdotes, and oh gosh, it does get your heart pumping, doesn't it?
Yeah. Right, and that would have happened to you as well during your...
Ah, yes, when I got diagnosed with a brain tumor and a movement disorder, and
Yeah, all
just yeah.
So I went home, did all the research, and one of the first things I read was, because I looked like, okay, what's the recovery rate? How do you recover? And it was basically, everything I read was the recovery rate's 5%.
Yep.
There's no hope. There's no options. Good luck. Like, honestly, that's really what it was. And
how did you react to that? Just reading all those facts and statistics.
I think for me, it was, I can be a little bit rebellious in the sense of, like, if you tell me I can't do something, I'm going to do it.
Ah, yes.
So when I read that, I was a little bit like, no, I don't accept that. I don't accept that that's going to be my reality for the rest of my life. And I'm going to do everything I can to recover. And I'm going to make all of the sacrifices and try all of the treatments that I need to try.
To become part of the 5%, right?
Yes. I was like, I will be one of the 5%. That's it. There was no, for me, it was like not an option to not recover.
Of course, right.
Because I don't know, I've always, it's just, I have this determination, I guess, and so that's how I felt. It was really devastating, but it's also like, okay, now I know what I'm working with, and so I'm gonna go online and read about the 5%. And I remember at the time there was like this super obscure website with like this dodgy like podcast link. Of this guy that literally just got on the phone with different people from around the world and talked to them about their recovery from CFS.
Oh, really?
Because there, at the time, like this was 4 or 5 years ago, there weren't podcasts about chronic illness. There weren't like Instagram support groups. Or,
of course,
like,
right? That only really surfaced recently in the past few years,
yeah.
right?
Or maybe there wasn't, I just didn't find it, but I would sit there and listen on my computer and like listen to these stories of people recovering and just find that so empowering, and hearing them and what they did and what I could potentially do. That's what I think was a really massive motivator for me, is like, even though like I knew that there wasn't a formula for recovery, I still don't think there is, because everybody's journey is different. It was like, at least there was hope.
Yeah.
And also, my doctor at the time, she was really confident that I was going to recover. And she told me that I was going to recover, like, in a fourth of the time that it took. She was like, oh yeah, you'll be recovered in 6 months or something. It took me 3 years. So, I think as well, her having that confidence that I was going to recover really helped me, because it wasn't a question of if, it was a question of when.
So yeah, in her confidence, you in turn had confidence as well that you would recover.
Yeah. And I had a lot of health professionals tell me that too. They're like, oh, you're young, like it might take time, but you're going to bounce out of this, and like you have everything going for you. So I don't know, like I think that just because I'm young doesn't mean that you can't, like people that are older than I was can't bounce out of it.
So everyone's recovery journey is different, right? But in your own personal journey, what were some of the key things that really helped you get to where you are today?
Yeah, I think it was a combination of things. It was, and I think it always is, like maybe not always, often is, there's not one answer. It's like a holistic view. I think for me, it was, I changed my lifestyle completely. I went from being type A, super energetic, high-performing person to stuck in bed most of the day, barely being able to do anything, and really giving myself that space to rest. which was hard. It was really hard. And and when I say lifestyle change, I also mean like sleeping a certain amount, waking up I developed discipline in that.
Discipline and like
Yes.
getting into routine.
Exactly. That's exactly what it was. And I think that that's actually a big thing that I carried into my life today is this discipline and consistency, because what I realized with the journey with chronic fatigue syndrome is it wasn't going to be an overnight fix.
Yep.
And that the small things added up were going to make the difference. So I did yoga every day. I changed my diet. I took supplements, and I prayed and journaled, and I didn't do meditation at the time. I also did whatever exercise I could, and it's the little things. Then I would see my doctor, and I did acupuncture, and I did diet change, and then treating. I had a yeast infection in my gut, and thrush, which is like yeast infection but in your mouth. A lot of babies get it, and it's very rare for adults to get it. So it's really an indication that I had some serious gut issues. So I was on medication for that. A lot of it came down to my gut and whatever I ate. If I had to cut out dairy, I had to cut out gluten, soy, sugar, corn, beans, almonds. Like I had a whole range of allergies. And I wouldn't even say allergy, I would say intolerances.
Yeah.
And I don't have all of those intolerances today. I have been able to introduce some foods back in, but I still can't do dairy or gluten or sugar. So taking all of those things out of my diet. And then also getting tested for more gut issues, working on that. And then just being consistent with sleep, and I went on a paleo diet for a while that really helped me, listening to my body, getting rest. And then, and so I did all of those things and recovered to the point where I was able to move to Sydney, which was crazy because, it's actually crazy to me thinking back, because when I moved back to the US from France, I've personally always wanted to live overseas. Like I have not necessarily wanted to live in America, I wanted to live overseas, which is why I moved to France. So when I moved back to the US, I knew already that I wanted to move to Sydney. And I was telling people.
What made you, out of all countries, I guess, to move to Sydney?
Yeah.
Why Australia of all places, eh?
Australia. Right. Okay, so Sydney. I went to Sydney when I was 19 on holiday.
So you've been here before?
Yeah, I'd been here before. We took a cruise out of Sydney Harbour to New Zealand and back.
Oh, okay.
And
so you weren't really in Sydney that much?
No, I wasn't, but this is the crazy part. For those of you that don't know Sydney, we stayed in a hostel or a hotel in Redfern, which is sort of like this, especially 10 years ago, would have been like this seedy area of Sydney. And we went to this brunch place, this cafe, and I fell in love with Sydney. It was like in Redfern. And we also spent some time in the harbour and Opera House and
the usual sites, obviously.
Yeah, but then I spent 2 weeks on a cruise with a bunch of Australians.
And is that where they really?
That's what really
really drew you.
I started loving Australian culture and just the accent and the vibes, and so I loved it. And then I remember thinking to myself, I would live here. I would love to live here one day. But I had literally already booked my flight to move to France. So, and I had everything set up there. So I went back to the US, was there for a week and moved to France. So it was kind of out of sight, out of mind. But when I moved back to the US, I knew that I didn't want to stay there. I also knew that going back to France wasn't necessarily a healthy option, just because I think culturally, as much as I love it, it wasn't like the best fit for me and my personality.
Fair enough, right? Yeah.
So that's why I decided I wanted, and I just felt, and I don't know if like people listening have this sometimes. I'm the type of person that I just get these gut feelings, and I just get this like something inside of me tells me that it's the right thing, and no one can convince me otherwise. And that's a little bit how Sydney was for me.
Well, you know what they say, trust your gut, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, I remember having discussions with my sister where she was like, "Why are you moving to Sydney?" And I was like, "It's just like the right thing." And or people being like, "How are you going to move to Sydney? You're sick. You have chronic fatigue syndrome." And I just remember saying, "I'm going to move to Sydney. I'm going to recover, and I'm going to move to Sydney because that's where I'm meant to be."
And that's where you are now.
Yeah, look at me now, 3 years later. But, and it's just funny thinking about it because when I moved here, I still had chronic fatigue syndrome. And there were moments where I doubted a lot whether or not it was a good idea because it could have gone either way. I could have crashed, or I obviously went the right way because I ended up recovering while I was here and all of that. But it was a massive risk to be moving on the other side of the world. I had 0 friends here. I didn't have a place to live, and I didn't have a job. So I rocked up to Sydney, stayed in an Airbnb for the first 3 weeks, and within a month I had all of those things.
That's amazing. Wow, that's pretty lucky.
Yeah, I'm very fortunate. And so I think that for me, moving to Sydney has been the best decision that I've ever made for myself. I feel like the good season of my life started here. And because prior to moving here, I mean, I dealt with a lot of anxiety, depression. I think because I was homeschooled, I didn't have that group of friends, and I didn't belong.
Right, yeah.
And I always felt like an outsider and not good enough, and all of these things. And when I came here, I became part of a church here, and I started to build friends who genuinely accepted me. I felt like I belonged for the first time. I was shown kindness and love, and people put value on me. And this is the first time that I've really felt that. So I think that Sydney was really the beginning of my recovery journey from chronic fatigue. Well, not the beginning. It was like the beginning of the end of my recovery journey, I guess.
So you say Sydney was the last leg, so to speak, of your recovery journey, right?
Yeah.
So what were some other things that really pushed you to the finish line?
Look, I think when I moved here, I was well enough to work full time, which was really good, but still not. I was probably about like 70% recovered. And I was that way for the first year. And what was unexpected but really helpful for me is, so I was in a relationship kind of 6 months after I arrived. We broke up, and then all of these things inside of me started to come out, all of this pain, anxiety, etc. And I started going to counseling because I was in a really bad place in terms of my mental health, like really bad. There'd be moments where I would like call someone, and specifically my sister, and I was like, I don't actually know how I'm going to get through the rest of this day because it was so bad, and I didn't know why.
Yeah.
And so I started going to counseling, and I realized through counseling that I had never actually been in touch with my emotions before. I had never actually let myself feel the disappointment or the sadness or the, or the feelings or the anger or all of these. I'm trying to think of the feelings like sadness, disappointment, anger, joy, like even
really?
just like feeling feelings.
Yeah.
Because I grew up in an environment where feelings were, you had to, unless feelings were logical, they were invalid. unless there was a
right,
logical
yeah.
reason to feel a feeling, they were
Then it's not
invalid.
valid. Yeah.
Yes. So that's the environment that I grew up in. So I would learn to logically think through my feelings and then dismiss them.
Okay, so you would kind of compartmentalize them in a way when there's like, okay, that's not really, let's just put it in the back burner for now.
Yeah, exactly. So, or telling my feelings that they're not really, like true, or they're not. Except you can't do that with feelings.
No,
They're
okay.
feelings.
Yeah, they're feelings. They need to be felt.
They're not like you can't be like you're not true feeling. Like that's not. You can say that about a fact, but like, you can't say that about a feeling because your feelings. It is what it is.
Exactly.
And for the first time, I reconnected with my feelings. I reconnected with the disappointment of having a chronic illness. I reconnected with the sadness of losing my hopes, my dreams. I reconnected with the disappointment of getting in a car accident and the trauma of that. And I cried for 2 months straight. Like legitimate. I remember there were moments where I was laying on the floor just bawling in my bedroom, just like, and all it was is like, I'm sad because I got in a car accident and my life changed from that moment. I'm sad because I lost control. I'm sad because I had to move back from France. I'm sad. Like, it was just
like the culmination of those emotions, really, right?
Yeah, and it was the first time that I gave myself space to feel. And I physically felt, as I was crying, healing happened inside of my body. Like, I remember I would cry for like a minute, like a while actually, and I would experience an immediate level of relief from my back pain, for example.
Wow.
Or, because I got a lot of anxiety, right? And I realized that the anxiety was actually an indication that there was an emotion that had left unprocessed.
Mm-hmm.
So that was such a revelation for me because I had never understood the mind-body correlation before. Whereas I think even in the community now, people are really starting to. This is common knowledge.
Common knowledge these days, right? The connection between the physical and like the mental, emotional.
So after 2 months of this counseling journey, I felt significantly better from my symptoms, and then within maybe 6 months after that, I was recovered from chronic fatigue syndrome.
Oh, that's amazing. Which
is like crazy.
Yeah.
Because I just didn't expect that. I knew that I was on the path to recovery, but I didn't expect
that to be like the final.
Yeah.
Like the climax of
Yes, exactly. And people are like, well, how do you know you're recovered? And I know I'm recovered because I don't get this symptom that I used to get called post-exertion malaise, where essentially if you overexert yourself, then you kind of experience this massive crash. I get normal tired. I think all normal people have some level of crash if they're like doing a lot or whatever, where you like, oh, I've been doing a lot this week, so I need to take a nap on Sunday. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But it was really weird in a good way. But it was also gradual, so it was less weird. You know what it was? I had to learn what it was like to be tired like a normal person.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I forgot, because I would have a big week, right, and then I'd be super tired on the weekend, and then I'd be like, oh my gosh, I'm relapsing into chronic fatigue syndrome. But then I talk to people, and they're like, no, like, normal people get tired too, like, this is normal.
Yeah, same level of tiredness as everyone else, right?
And so I had to train myself out of this fear and anxiety of crashing, because I constantly had this fear that I was going to go back into chronic fatigue syndrome. So I don't have that anymore, thankfully. It took me a little while to get out of it and figure out what normal tired looked like and figure out how much rest I need and how much stuff I can do. And even now, I still get days where like I'm anxious, I'm feeling certain emotions, I don't process them, and I'm exhausted. at the end of the
Already?
day.
Wow.
And it feels a little bit like when I had chronic fatigue syndrome, but I also know that this is because I'm suppressing my emotions.
It's all the weight, the emotional
Yeah.
weight.
Sometimes I wish that I wasn't as emotional as I am, but I find that I have a lot of emotions that I have to deal with on a regular basis.
Yeah. So once you fully recovered from chronic fatigue, what was the next step for you then?
Yeah, I think the next step for me kind of happened as I was recovering, because I started chronic hope because I was recovered enough to do something, to try to step into a new phase of my life and either study or kind of thinking more about what I wanted in terms of a career.
Yep.
So I started chronic hope when I still had chronic fatigue syndrome, but it evolved. I recovered during my first year of working on chronic hope, which was really cool. So it was interesting. So I started chronic hope before I recovered, but it has evolved. I've been able to do more now that I've recovered, which has been really awesome. Yeah, so the next step I think for me was just continuing building chronic hope and also studying. I was ready, when I recovered from CFS, I was ready to study again because I had stopped studying while I was in France because I got sick and I knew that I wanted to get a degree by the time I was 30, 27 now, so I started studying a bachelor's in information technology because I want to get in the tech space and have a degree by the time I'm 30.
Yeah.
So, and also, it's been such a crazy thing, even just, I think, stepping into what I felt like I was meant to do coming to Sydney.
Yeah.
There's been so much blessing in my life. It's literally crazy the amount of blessing and the amount of good things that have happened since I've come here in terms of just the type of work I've been doing, which is the job that I currently have, working in a university, getting paid super well, the friendships, the team that I'm working with Chronic Hope, and then also I got a full tuition scholarship to study my degree in information
Wow, that's pretty good.
It's massive.
Amazing. Yeah.
It's the type of thing that every American dreams of because
of course, right?
Because
yes.
University is so
very
expensive in America, and also as an American coming to Australia, it's still very expensive. So it's almost like I feel like in that moment, my life, moving to Sydney changed my life. From the narrative of I grew up in a lower middle class, rural, white American family to now I have the prospect of coming out of university and having no student loan debt and being able to step into my future life, my future career without the weight of debt, with just essentially clean slate. And that for someone from my background, that's massive. So Sydney has been, I was actually talking with someone earlier about this, but it's I felt like I lost three years of my life to chronic fatigue syndrome, but what's happened in Sydney, the blessing that's come to me in Sydney has more than made up for that. It's almost like it's been redeemed and
then some, right?
I know, and I've cramped all of the good things of that usually maybe happen in a span of 6 years.
Yeah, 5 years, 3. That's amazing.
And it's like a redemption story. I feel
it's the redemption arc of your book of Jami Emerson.
Yeah, and
Tale of Jami.
The Tale of Jami Emerson. There's a ring and a Dark Lord.
And a Dark Lord.
So yeah, it's been amazing. I'm just so thankful. I'm so thankful to be where I'm at now, and that's why I'm so determined to do everything I can to give a voice to people that don't have a voice, that don't have the energy that I have, that haven't recovered yet, that may not be ever able to recover because some of their conditions are too severe and giving a voice to that, and also communicating that doesn't make, like, having a chronic condition, having health issues doesn't make anyone any less than anyone else. It just means that we have to live life differently.
Yep.
And I'm still on that journey. I have chronic pain that I'm working through. I've been having an ankle issue for about a year. I haven't been able to walk properly for a year. And I'm dealing with that. And the journey will continue. But Chronic Hope and what we're doing through Chronic Hope, it's my way of giving back and being like, okay, this gift was given to me, or this is the outcome of my chronic illness. What could I?
It's your way of paying it forward, right?
Yeah, this is the outcome of my chronic illness. What can I do to help other people that can't do the same, or that haven't been able to reach the same level of recovery as me?
Of course, giving them a platform, giving them a voice.
And offering resources, and like, there's so much that we could be doing for the community.
Yeah.
This community, unfortunately, is marginalized and not heard and not appreciated, especially in the season of COVID-19, where people are like, oh, it's only people with pre-existing conditions are affected, and it's just people that over the age of 65 or 70, and it's like, no, like, you don't understand. There's young people with autoimmune conditions, like, and the blatant, almost like, disregard for that.
Yeah.
And it's just so sad to me, because, like, if you look at the rates of the statistics around chronic illness, specifically in America, for example, 7 out of 10 Americans have a chronic condition. So this includes anxiety, depression, cancer, arthritis, chronic fatigue. That's
pretty
more than half of the population.
More than half, it's a big percentage.
That means it's normal to have a chronic condition. So why is it stigmatized? Why aren't our voices heard? Why are we not getting the resources we need? Why did I have to go thousands of dollars in debt for medical expenses just to maintain and recover from chronic illness? And this is it's Chronic Hope is just a small organization, but it's like, I want to dedicate my life to making life better for marginalized communities, or people that are ill, people that are in poverty, women, ethnic minorities, etc. Like, it's just, I have such a heart for helping people, because I know that I've suffered, and I hate seeing other people suffer as well.
Yeah, of course. You don't want to see people in pain, people having trouble. You want to be able to lift them up to where you are, right? Where you're not suffering, where you're not in pain, where you're, being able to live your best life.
Yeah, but it's not even just where you're not suffering or you're not in pain, because I think it's a normal part of life to suffer and be in pain. Like, life is not rosy for everyone 100% of the time, but if you are going through something difficult, or if you do have pain, being able to live well while having that pain, being able to still have joy and happiness, and not feel like you're less than, or not feel guilty. You know what I mean? It's because the truth is I have chronic pain, right? So there's moments when I'm studying and my neck hurts so bad, but I'm pushing through because I have to finish my assessment. And then at the end, like, I'm in a lot of pain and I have to treat the pain. So there's times where I have to push through. I mean, I've been also wearing a wrist brace for the last year because I get wrist pain when I use a mouse. So I'm pushing through these things because I ultimately need to study, or I need to work and all of that. But that doesn't mean that I'm not in pain. I'm just pushing through.
For our community, what recommendations do you have in terms of, say, books, music, podcasts, anything that you could recommend for listeners out there?
Yeah, look, there's a couple of Instagram accounts that I love following. One of them is Mr. Colitis Crohn's, and he has a stoma bag and raises awareness around colitis and, like, stoma bags, and I don't know all of the vocabulary around that, but he's so good, like just raising awareness for that community. And another account that I really like is chronically.court on Instagram. I don't even know where, she's from the US, and she's so positive. Like every time you look at her profile, she has so much joy, and she's obviously struggling and living with some severe chronic health issues. And I know it's not easy for her all the time, but you can tell that she just has this joy in life, and it's just like, I want to be the type of person that even though I'm in pain, I can exude joy and peace and be the person that brings other people joy as well. In terms of, I don't know, like I'm watched this series recently called Selling Sunset on Netflix. It's not Spoonie related, but it's
would you recommend?
I would definitely recommend.
Definitely recommend.
It's like everybody, it's like reality TV guilty pleasure.
Of course.
Yes.
Everybody loves those.
Yes, exactly. And then I don't have like a lot of recommendations in terms of like Spoonie books, because I haven't, to be honest, read a lot of those. I read a lot of fantasy books, to be honest.
What's your favorite series? Or what are you reading at the moment?
My favorite series is, so what I've just finished was a series by Robin Hobb called The Live Ship Trader series. I think that's what it's called. And it was really good. Total like fantasy geek, which is kind of weird. Like it's kind of weird to admit, but I love myself, so.
Everyone's got an inner geek.
Yeah.
Everyone.
So, and then also on Instagram, I really love following funny people. So there's this girl based in Africa called Elsa Majimbo, and she has the funniest. She's like a comedian that posts like reels and videos, and she exploded during the pandemic. So I definitely recommend following her. She's so funny, and it's a little bit satirical. So those are my recommendations.
Alright, we'll make sure to link all of Jamie's recommendations in our show notes. And Jamie, thanks for being the interviewee this time.
Yeah, it's been
this
interesting.
Of the podcast.
Thanks for interviewing me.